So, welcome to another interview with Media Village and Original Digital. This is Omar Tawakol. Omar, hi.
Hi, glad to be here.
So for those two or three people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a little bit of background as to who you are?
Yeah, I'll never forget Randy Kilgore, one of my favorite leaders in ad tech when he was at the Wall Street Journal. He looked at me, he said, "Omar, you're a geek in a suit." That kind of sums it up. So I, did computer science and found the ad industry and just, fell in love with it. Spent the early part of it trying to transform, the way ads were targeted by saying, you know, let's show ads based on data about people rather than based on the context. And that, became BlueKai, and before that, audience science and the Oracle Data Cloud. And it was wonderful to watch programmatic going from zero to like $100 billion industry, completely driven by real-time bidding and data and optimization.
Yep.
Um, I left that and started a AI company in a completely different domain in conversational AI before we had large language models and it was all the rage. And 2 years into that, got bought by Cisco, integrated into Cisco, and then of course, you're part of every step of this history, Corey. And then
Lucky
we
enough.
got back to do one more transformation, and this is actually the funnest of them all.
Yep. So obviously, I'm lucky to have been in all of those, but with Rembrand, which is the newest one, why when we went and did Voicea, that was an AI company, and I know that's your first love. Why come and merge AI into advertising now?
Yeah, I mean, it's the time is so amazing now because for 20 years we've optimized the hell out of programmatic.
Hmm.
We can show the exact right ad to the right person at the right price. And it's just more and more squeezing out efficiencies, except we miss the forest for the trees. For 20 years, while we were in our labs figuring out how to optimize the hell out of everything, consumers were caring less and less and less. They just did not want to have interruptive ads crammed down their throats.
Hmm.
And it's gotten to a point where millions of consumers literally pay money to run away from ads. That
Hmm.
should be sending a very clear signal to someone in the industry. And so now, because of the development of AI, instead of taking the iceberg part that we see, and this is an analogy from Terry Gwaja, the part of the iceberg that we see, which is the optimization and the bidding and the real-time targeting, there's this entire field that was under the water that was invisible, which is how to actually use technology to create the creative itself, how to
Hmm.
make an ad more effective as opposed to more efficient. And now with, access to AI, all of a sudden the rest of that iceberg, the majority of it that was unseen can now be seen and touched and optimized with generative techniques. And so that is what Rembrandt came from, which is the idea that instead of, cramming ads down people's throat, why don't we have a more polite way of engaging customers inside the content they love without interruption, using AI to put branded objects into content.
Hmm. And we know because obviously the space of product placement, which is kind of where the idea stems from, has been an area of interest for many, many, many years. But the ability to do it in a very short turnaround time, to be able to do it that works in the way that can be inserted into YouTube, TikTok videos, et cetera, with their shorter schedules for production, that wasn't possible before because you didn't have the AI systems that are in place now. So can you do a little explanation for people about what are the AI techniques? Like, what are the types of systems that we're building at this point? Because it is complicated, and everybody thinks they understand AI just because everybody's been using it for a while, but it's really not the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, I mean, where all the buzz has been around has been in creating something new, which is you go in and now with Sora you can go in and say, "Give me two white fluffy puppies," and you'll see a video of two white fluffy puppies, and it's just amazing. And those techniques are great. We use some similar underlying techniques, diffusion algorithms and such, to do something very different. And it's in a sense somewhat of a harder problem. If I give you an existing video and I have to say I want to put my white polka dotted Dalmatian puppies in second 30, respecting all the motion that exists in your real video, that is an entirely different problem, because now your brain knows exactly what to expect, and it's not going to be impressed with something that unexpected.
Mhm.
That's why in the early days of LLMs, people, you keep seeing these eyes that looked weird, and, six fingers and all that kind of thing. Hallucination is a problem when you're creating things from scratch. But when you're trying to fuse objects that already exist, it's a very different set of techniques. So what are the techniques? First thing we do, and we take a video, is we basically mimic the human brain. The human brain gets an image on the retina, and that image on a retina is actually in 2 dimensions, and we explode into 3D with the machinery in our brains. And so we have to do the same thing with a video. Video comes in, it's actually a 2D object, and it's frame by frame. And what we have to do is model a 3-dimensional world represented in those 2 dimensions by essentially looking at where the camera is placed, reverse engineering that, looking at the depth of the scene, the planes, the surfaces on the planes, coming up with a model of lighting across 3 dimension. And the worst problem of all is understanding how objects move in relation to each other. Because when I put in an object that's virtual in that scene, I have to make sure my hands and fingers don't fly through it, or the object doesn't all of a sudden, the camera pans out and it comes back in, and all of a sudden the object, drops or is floating in midair. All
Mhm.
these problems would occur if you didn't have a physical model of reality so that you can fuse objects together in a virtual and a real scene.
And so that explanation is great because I think it helps people understand the complexity of what's being done. Is what Rembrandt doing, could it have been done 10 years ago or 5 years ago? Or is it really only in the last couple of years that this is possible?
You absolutely could have done it 5 years ago with great excruciating pain, and people did. What they did is they would hire VFX people, and they would put objects in scenes that weren't there, and it would take them tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars and weeks and weeks. And what's beautiful about what we're doing now is we can do this in the speed of compute. And that opens up a massive scalable opportunity that you wouldn't do before. If you
Mhm.
knew it was going to take you tens of thousands of dollars and weeks, you might as well have shipped that can of Pepsi to the scene and
Sure.
had them filming in it. But now you can do all this post production, and you can do it way less painfully, and you can do it
Yeah.
much more scalably, and you can run it like media.
Yeah. Well, this is obviously it's another startup, and you've been successful with a number of startups along the way. And as we mentioned, I've been lucky enough to be part of many of those startups. So thank you again. But what's your formula for success when you have an idea that you want to turn into a business and then you start to hire and you start to build out the idea? Because you've done this successfully a couple times now. So what do you have a formula? Do you have a path or a journey that you like to take?
It's not completely a formula, but there are some basics that I do, and I'll walk them through. I'm going to jump to number two, and I'll get
Okay.
back to number one. And the reason I'm going in out of order, is because you said you were lucky to be part of the journey. It's kind of different than that. Is I was lucky to be able to find great people who joined the journey, and that is, after the getting the vision for a big problem right, is getting the people on the bus, getting the people who are going to really be passionate about the journey and have the skill and the ability to learn and the ability to work with a team and multiply each other. So that is, I think, the one of the ingredients that I always look for is look for people who are better than me and who are able to work with each other and multiply each other. So that's like really key. Going back to the vision part, vision is very important, because you have to look at a problem where you can produce more than 10x value,
Hmm.
that you can come in and say, I'm going to do something transformative here, and it's going to be radically different than what existed before. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up finding that 1 year into the journey, you have to make all these little micro pivots and changes to, the edges of your idea. And if the market is too small, it might not be worth it. But if it's a really big market idea and a really transformative idea, making changes along the way, who cares? You know where you're going, and it's somewhere very interesting. And so you'll put up with all the changes that you need to make to get there to make something beautiful. So great vision with 10x change, fantastic people who are better than you, who are going to work together and multiply each other are, I think, a couple of the things that are really important. And the third one is, particularly in a B2B domain, understand the disruption that you are going to do and how the buyers in that domain think. because people from out of domain who just trivialize the intricacies of getting a buyer to buy and the workflow and the systems. Like you come into the ad ecosystem, there's advertisers, there's agencies, there's publishers, and there's a vast layer cake of ecosystem in between. And if you don't understand that, you're going to make 20 different mistakes. So being able to know the people in the domain that you're going to disrupt and the mentality and thinking of the buyer, I think is, I'd say one of the third areas of success. And the fourth area is having a culture that assumes truth lies outside the building, that isn't enamored with your own theories. Come up with the idea, test it, iterate, come up with the idea, test it, iterate, move fast, always improve, and do not assume that the person with the highest pay in the room is the one with the right idea. You need a
Mhm.
learning culture that knows how to move very fast to get to the truth. Those are, I think, some of the basics that I tend to use over and over in my playbook.
Yeah. And going kind of reverse order, that last piece has always been important to me too, because what I've liked is that with the teams that we've had, there's a there's no instances where ego gets in the way of an intelligent decision. And I've said this a couple of times where everybody has a healthy ego. That's okay because you should be proud about what you're doing, but it never gets in the way. And that's one thing. It's a humility to a business approach, which I've always liked. But the other thing which I want to call out in the first one, the vision side of things, there are a lot of startups that I've seen that they do go after something too small. It's almost like as if they went after a feature of a product. And those
FNX.
businesses don't have that long-term potential. On the flip side, though, you have to deal with a lot of people who are saying your vision's wrong. So how have you always dealt with that? Because I even remember when I had joined BlueKai, people were saying, but separating the data from the media, like they didn't necessarily buy it. They weren't understanding why. I kind of got it. How do you deal with people saying, that doesn't make sense?
Yeah, that also goes back to the idea of understanding the ecosystem you're disrupting. So before I formed BlueKai, there were two companies that were trying to really drive behavioral targeting, and they were Audience Science and Dakota. And while building one of those to Audience Science, I started noticing that there were 300 ad networks, 300, and all of them started saying, look, Audience Science, I'd love to work with you, but you're competing with me because you're an ad network. Can you just give me the data? And we're like, no, that's not our model. You
Hmm.
hear that more than once, and it occurs to you that wow, there could be an ecosystem, there could be a whole marketplace for data and a technology layer. And then I wouldn't have to compete with any of the 300 ad networks or publishers or any of those. I could be their friend, and maybe I could be the best in the entire world at that one piece that is important. So once you have clarity of vision, and you didn't do it because you were, had a dream and you didn't understand the domain, you did it because people actually asked you they explained their pain and you know how to solve it. Once you get that kind of conviction, you can walk through 2 or 3 years of doubt and still make it out the other side.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And staying true to that vision and understanding that you feel like you understand what the disruption needs to be. And also one thing that I think we've always done a good job of is going and making sure that we're constantly checking and asking our customers if this is still something that's valuable to them. And if we have to tweak it, we tweak it. But that's always been something I've liked too.
Yes, that you're right. And we did tweak along the way, BlueKai. And I feel very similar at Rembrand, which is no nobody doubts this vision of polite advertising, something
Mhm.
that can engage you without interruption, because we all want that. And so it's just you have to walk people through okay, how do you get there? Why buy this versus another form of media? How do you do it? It's a similar thing. You just have to have a longer breath than most to walk the industry through this evolution.
Yep. Okay, last question, because I know it's you're out of the country, you're in a different time zone completely. What advice do you give to somebody who wants to join into the advertising industry or the marketing industry now, knowing that there's such change going on? Like, what would you ask them to focus their attention on?
The digital ecosystem is fairly well developed. I think all the fun comes in massive disruptions, and generative AI is giving this opportunity for massive disruption. So, there's folks like us trying to transform a completely different form of non-interruptive advertising that's interesting to look at. There's, other startups who are using generative techniques to actually generate the creative itself, or to allow you to do measurement in some way that wasn't there. So finding a disruptive new angle is a great way to enter the industry. Otherwise, you're entering into something that's a bit mature, and there are plenty of people already occupying those slots, and then it's harder for you to kind of like make your way up. You always go to an ecosystem that's changing fast, because then all boats rise, and you don't have to compete with other people because you're growing together.
Clearly the answer of an entrepreneur.
Yeah, totally,
All right,
totally.
Omar. Well, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of the day. I'm sure I'll talk to you at least 4 or 5 more times today.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey.